Hello and welcome to MadeCast, the official podcast of the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, a series of lectures on video game history. As part of the Made's ongoing effort to preserve history through teaching and displaying playable exhibits of rare games and consoles.
While life in the time of COVID has forced us to close our doors, the support of people like you has allowed us to continue to bring joy, to continue to bring history through you to lectures like this one and the one you're about to hear in a few minutes. My name is Red.
I'm Chen.
And I'm Miles. This week, Alex is meeting up with Chip Morningstar and Matt Hargett later on to talk about their experiences working at LucasArts and to get down to the nitty-gritty tech talk of running SCUMM.
This will be some very interesting nitty-gritty technical information for all you super nerds out there, like us included. So stay interested in all of this. We recommend you stick with it. It is a very enlightening and interesting talk.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into any of that, we are going to save some of the news and other little tidbits of information for after this, because we want to let you guys get in on this. And also, what an amazing name, that Chip Morningstar. I got to say, Matt Hargett, also fantastic name, but man, Chip Morningstar.
Yeah, really rolled the dice and won on that one.
Yes, absolutely. We got to say, when they're talking about all this other stuff too, you'll get to hear a little bit what it was like for both of these guys talking about working for Lucasfilm games at the time, and just their experience with all of it as well. And you'll be able to hear how Chip got the job at Lucasfilm, which I personally thought was a very interesting story, and another his morning star doth aligned. We'll say that. I know. I'm sick. Give me a break. We'll get over it. But we want to let you guys get into that, and then we'll have another good talk about the news and all of our other fancy stuff once we get all of this to your ear holes. I need to stop talking. I told you I'm sick. Let's throw it on to the people who you guys are here to really hear. Alex, Chip Morningstar, and Matt Hargett.
Okay, welcome everybody.
Classic exercise in the futility of certain kinds of distributed social activity is encouraging people to try to do a sing-along over the phone.
Exactly. It's
how it doesn't work.
No, it does not. You really have to be in the same room. Welcome back, everybody. This is Alex here. I have today with me the illustrious Chip Morningstar, who is the co-creator and really the heavy nerd behind Habitat, the super programmer, who I had to bring in my own super programmer just to question properly, and who will join us later in the show, Matt Hargett from last week. But Chip, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to focus on your early career and how the hell you got to be such a good programmer and got a job at Lucasfilm Games.
I don't hold myself up as being a super programmer, although I'm always thrilled if other people do. The way I got a job at Lucasfilm Games is a little peculiar. I was working at a lab in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Been a big fan of computer graphics, and we had SIGGRAPH in Detroit in summer of '83. And one of the things that happened was there were a number of papers that were at SIGGRAPH from various people at Lucasfilm, the Lucasfilm graphics group. And one of them was Bill Reeves' seminal paper on particle systems. And it just blew me away. I was just like, whoa, this is the first thing I've seen that isn't about drawing polygons. And since I'd always been skeptical of the whole idea of orienting your world around drawing polygons, because the world is mostly not made of polygons, I was just impressed. And then earlier that year, I had gotten a chance to go visit Lucasfilm as a result of hanging out with an old friend of mine who was working for Atari at the time. And we had both flown out to the West Coast to attend the National Computer Conference. And he had to make a visit to Lucasfilm. And he said, well, why don't you just come along with me? And I said, oh, this sounds like fun. So I tagged along, and we went and we visited Lucasfilm. And then he and I went up to my family's place up in the Sierras, and then drove down together to Anaheim for the NCC. And so I got to see the Lucasfilm computer division offices in San Rafael and meet some of the people there and watch what they're doing. And my whole reaction was, oh, this is so cool. I would just love to work here. This is just, everything seems like paradise. And so when Bill Reeves published this paper, I was like, I got to do something. And the call on the paper was their address. So I just sent them my resume. I just cold sent them my resume with a very audacious cover letter, and figured, probably nothing will come of this, but hey, a stamp was, whatever it was, 35 cents or whatever it was in those days, and a guy can dream. It's kind of like buying a lottery ticket. What you're purchasing is not, is the chance to fantasize about what would happen if you won. And didn't think much about it after that. And round about December, my wife and I were getting ready to move out to the West Coast because Xanadu, who I was affiliated with at the time, had gotten some funding. And one of the things they had done was pay for everybody to move to the West Coast because they figured that would be a better environment for them to get further backing for hypertext. And so we were in the process of loading up a rental car for another adventure, which we don't have time to get into here, but we're literally an hour or half hour before when the guy from the phone company was supposed to come and disconnect our phone, which is how it worked in those days. You actually had to call the phone company and have them do that. And my phone rang, and it was Peter Langston from Lucasfilm Games. And he said, hi, is this Chip Morningstar? And I said, yes. And he said, well, hi, this is Peter Langston from Lucasfilm. We got your resume, and then something happened, and I lost it. And now HR is on my back because they're supposed to have it for their files, and I'm going to get into trouble. And would you mind terribly sending me another copy? And I said, well, sure, no problem. But I'm in the process of moving to California, so can I get back to you in a couple weeks? And he said, sure. And so I did that and sent them another copy of the resume. And then he called me back about 3-4 weeks later when I was now on the West Coast. And he says, well, since we had this sort of embarrassing song and dance, why don't you just come up and we'll interview you. Then just we at least owe you that. And so I did. And it was one of these interviews made in heaven, where we all just loved each other terribly. And a couple of the other guys there said, well, it's like you always work here. And I just felt tremendously at home, and apparently they liked me, and so they made me an offer. At which point I said, well, I'm committed to doing this Xanadu thing, but can I, if that doesn't work, can I call you? And they said, oh, yeah, okay. And so this was December of 83. And so round about May, when the funding for Xanadu dried up, I gave Peter Langston a call saying, I need a job now. And he said, well, come on up. And I interviewed again, and it was even more fabulous. And they made me an offer, and so I went to work for them. And it was like, I'm not quite sure exactly how the chemistry happened, but a lot of it was interpersonal chemistry. I think a lot of it was their whole approach was to bring a degree of engineering sophistication to an industry which up until that point didn't have much, and my particular take on things was very, very compatible with that. And they had a couple of particular technical problems they were dealing with, which were kind of right down my alley. And so all of those things kind of combined. So the way you get a job at Lucasfilm is you have a memorable last name, which is how Peter was able to track me down through the phone book, and then have them lose your paperwork.
So I want to turn it over now to Matt Hargett, who is here, and I hope Matt hits record on his side right now.
Sorry, recording.
Matt has some Matt was here last week, and he has some very specific contextual questions about your programming choices that you made back in the day. And I'm going to hand this over and let you guys go, but I am going to have to cut you off in about 15 minutes. So, Matt, all yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex. So I worked on open source projects that helped re-implement the Sierra Creative Interpreter and the Adventure Game Interpreter from Sierra, and then I worked on SCUMM VM a little bit also. I've been working in technology for about 25 years. I started programming in 1984. But I'm going to go so far back that I have context on some things. And I have watched your interviews with like the Computer History Museum, which I found really illuminating. I love those verbal histories to give me some more of this context. And there's a couple of questions I had that relate to how SCUMM and proto-SCUMM things came about based on the history of what was going on at the time. So in about 1970, there was O code, which was BCPL. And that seemed to kick off this concept. It was made available on different microcomputers. That seemed to kick off this idea of a bytecode or having like a cross-platform code where you could write it once and then run it on a number of different microcomputers or mainframe platforms.
Right.
And then in around
San Diego, UCSD Pascal, yeah.
Yeah. And then in 1974, there was UC San Diego made this P system of bytecode so that there was more and more computer science students, and for them to run their programs at all, it took up too much mainframe time. So we need a way for them to run their programs on cheaper computers. So they made P code, which I programmed in on Apple IIs when I was in high school. My high school was not the richest high school in the world. So I went from Turbo Pascal to UCSD Pascal, which was a jarring experience, but it did work. And then in 1979, it seems to come to games, finally, this concept of cross-platform bytecode or interpreter code with the Z machine used for Zork and the Infocom adventures. And then in 1980, the Smalltalk virtual machine was made available across multiple platforms. Smalltalk existed before then, but that's the first time it was really you in your bedroom or your basement could put it on your crappy microcomputer, write programs and run them and kind of debug them. So that's kind of a micro history of like intermediate language in action, not just white papers and stuff. And what I'd love to know is, were you at the time aware of that developing kind of momentum for that concept, and did that inform SCUMM or some of those proto-SCUMM projects early on at Lucas? That's kind of what I want to get perspective on.
Okay, sure. So I was certainly aware of UCSD P system and Smalltalk. I was just a huge enthusiast for Smalltalk. In fact, I had an abortive startup just after I graduated from college, trying to do CAD in Smalltalk, and never went anywhere. It really never got off the ground at all. But I was just a huge Smalltalk enthusiast. But I don't know that any of that thinking figured directly into SCUMM, although obviously some of the ideas were percolating in the back of my head. I was aware of them. So it wasn't like when the way SCUMM came about was it really wasn't fundamentally, at first at least, about cross-platform. It was about cost of engineering. And the fundamental driving observation that kind of led to SCUMM is due to Ron Gilbert. And you could probably pump him for further details about this. But
we'll get him.
Yeah, Ron had the observation that there are, in building a game like an adventure game or something like that, the pieces of programming which are hard and delicate and require careful engineering nuance and things like that, or things like the renderer. I mean, graphics, getting high performance graphics rendering out of a 6502 based machine really requires you to, in those days, to do some very finely crafted, hand-coded assembly language programming. And all the games in those days were written on those platforms, were all written in assembly language because you just could not afford the overhead of a higher level language. But then On the other hand, the place in the code where all of the churn happens during development, where you're constantly having to fiddle with things and change things and debug and redebug and constantly be second guessing yourself, was in the game logic, the set of puzzles and gameplay, all of which follows the logic of that is all mostly fairly simple. It is not something which does a lot of computation per se. It's not computationally intensive at all. And so that's something that could be represented by a very simple high-level scripting language, which you could then interpret. And you could afford the interpretive overhead because it's actually not doing very much computation for those things, because all the intensive CPU cycles are doing things like rendering pixels. But the game logic was fairly simple, or it was simple computationally. It was not simple at all in terms of its global structure and in terms of all of the details, which are the things that actually make up the game. And so you want to be able to have something where you can express higher level of abstractions, and that you can change it and very easily just make a change, try it out, make another change, try it out, do that kind of iterative program development thing, which interpretive languages lend themselves to. You can instrument the hell out of it. And so the way SCUMM came about was Ron put these two things together. He said the part that's computation intensive has to be an assembly language, but the part that's difficult from a development perspective can be in a high-level language that doesn't do much computation. And so he came to me and he said, well, I got this idea. Could we do a simple scripting language? And he kind of sketched out some ideas for what the language would be like. And I've got a fair bit of background in doing things like compilers and language processing engines and things like that. I understand grammar and sort of the nuances of grammar and parsing pretty well, or at least I used to. I've since met people who are sort of savants in that area, and I no longer think of myself as an expert in that. There was a time when sort of Yak, the yet another compiler tool on Unix, was sort of my Swiss Army knife that I used for everything, and I used it for some really implausible things, and so Ron said, well, could we build a simple interpretive bytecode language that we could compile this higher level scripting language to? And I said, yeah, sure, that'd be really easy. And so he and I kind of worked out the particulars of what the bytecodes would be that it would compile to. And then I wrote the compiler, I debugged the grammar, made the high level grammar make sense from a sort of parsing grammar soundness point of view, and I implemented a compiler that compiled to this bytecode, and then Ron implemented an interpreter that would read the bytecode and run it. And then we put those two things together, and we had SCUMM, which I guess I can claim the credit or the blame for the name SCUMM, because the game was called Maniac Mansion. Actually, I think I named that game as well. I had a knack for naming things. And script creation utility for Maniac Mansion just kind of fell out. But I will not claim any responsibility for all of the other elements of the tool chain that followed from that, where Ron and some of his cohorts basically came up with a tool to correspond to every bodily fluid that you could imagine. So there was mucus and phlegm and a couple of other things.
I think that's consistent.
They're all very useful.
I think that's also consistent with, Ron did a great talk, I believe at GDC, there was kind of a postmortem or a postpartum of Monkey Island. And he talked about how, or maybe it was a different interview, he talked about how the name Guybrush came from the Mac art software, that was just guy.brush, because it was Mac Paint or whatever it was back then. And that's like the name of the character. That is, I think I love about that story is, one, you never know where inspiration will come from. And two, just being able to recognize serendipity and not fight serendipity when it comes to stuff like that. Because easily you can have it's like a 2-week fight, not a fight, but discussion about what do we name the character? And it's like Guybrush, done. Or maybe there was discussion after that, but there is some consistency there about that. And not just to extract like a kernel, an accidental kernel here is like, it's okay to have engineering arguments to try to find the best idea for the important things, but don't spend that same time on the not important, that same arguing time about the unimportant things.
Yeah. I tend to be someone who obsesses a lot over the names of things, and the number of times in which placeholder names have become the real names and just sort of been adopted kind of undermine some of that. If you ever have a chance to talk to AJ Redmer, who was one of the other people at Lucasfilm Games shortly after I was there, and then was a big high mucky muck at Microsoft for a while. He has a great story about Project Gotham Racing that you should ask him.
Okay.
I won't attempt to tell the story for him. You should definitely ask him about it. The whole gist of the story is names don't matter.
Right.
Speaking as a person to whom names are very important.
Right. Exactly. I like how you embrace your duality of what you have to be at peace with versus what your nerd brain wants.
Yeah. Well,
how are we?
I believe the clinical term is bike shedding, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess, like I've honed in on a specific part of SCUMM or your time at LucasArts or your kind of impact on the kind of gaming industry. Is there like some aspect, like some technical achievement that sticks out in your mind that you don't usually get asked about or get to talk about, something that people aren't aware of because it's not tangible or visible or interactable, but you're like, something you had to noodle on for a while and you had an epiphany moment, or it took a lot of hard work that you feel like you haven't gotten the chance to?
Sure. I think the thing that probably is the most significant thing in terms of my technical view of the world that came out of my experience at Lucasfilm. By the way, I was at Lucasfilm Games. LucasArts, once again, happened after everybody knows it as LucasArts because LucasArts lasted a lot longer, but we were actually part of Lucasfilm at the time. Minor detail. Is the server architecture for Habitat. And the way that the clients and the server cooperated to present the model of the world to the clients and manage it on the server was an architecture which at the time just felt like, well, this is the path of least resistance. This is just obviously how you do it. A lot of the particulars of the server, the way the server is structured, could be attributed to Janet Hunter, who is one of the main development people at Quantum, who is our online service partner, who was the main technical lead on their side. But the client server object model, the way we stretched objects across the network and all of that, which, as I say, at the time, to me, it just seemed like, well, this is obviously how you do it. How else could you possibly do it? And it was only much later that I came to realize, after bumping up against other things in the world, that we actually had invented something that was unique and was completely out of left field in terms of how everybody else was approaching this problem. And I have since basically re-implemented this same architecture, God, I don't know, 8 or 9 times now, in different contexts, and it has sort of informed my perspective on building distributed systems ever since, and contains lessons which I've written extensively about this, but it's kind of not part of the conversation in the distributed systems world, because it's just this weird branch off to the side, but which is become more relevant in well, it's more relevant in the world of blockchain, as it turns out, but it's also relevant in the world of mobile games, and so I remain hopeful that that this will become sort of a new idea that people will pick up more than they have.
I mean, that Chip, that's what's it like to live 30 years in the future? Because that's basically been your whole career.
Yeah, the way what it's like to live 30 years in the future is to see other people making billions of dollars doing the thing that you did back when. My entire career, I think, is a story of me attempting to turn down the ahead of the curve knob.
Yep. Well, Chip, I appreciate you being here. Matt, thank you for being here to ask us questions. Next week, of course, we will have Randy, your co-conspirator on Habitat, and we're going to let him talk about Habitat because we really desperately wanted to answer some very deep technical questions this week. So
Sure.
Very much appreciate you being here, Chip.
I'm happy to rant at length on anything, so feel free.
Well, we'll have you and Randy in on a future episode too, but specifically, we're doing adventure games, and next week, as I said, we'll have Randy to talk as well. So thanks for being here, both of you. Take care.
Thanks, Alex.
Okay, we've been talking about video games, and we might be able to put some of this in the rest of this. We've been talking about video game movies again. This is
again
because of another announcement. But Bethesda announced alongside Lucasfilm that they are doing an Indiana Jones game with an original story. I think that is the safest thing to do, as to not touch the Indiana Jones franchise. Because, like we were talking with the Resident Evil movies, Miles, you watched them all, and your verdict is?
They're not good, but they're fun.
Yes. They are fun to make fun of. They're fun to talk over.
My take on the Indiana Jones games is that they're kind of a mixed bag, but overall, they're enjoyable. They actually kind of relate because they're all, LucasArts titles. And I think the best one is probably Fate of Atlantis, which is its own original story, and it was a point-and-click adventure game made in the 90s. And I think between that and Emperor's Tomb are the two I played. Aside from the Lego Indiana Jones ones, which are all great. Because it's Lego.
Okay.
You can't go wrong with Lego.
Yes. Lego franchise is... It is a whole second genre. I attribute them to the early. They're the early Weird Al of video games. They are a parody, but they are a high tier quality parody of the original games, and executed supremely well. So developers out there, take note from Lego and their whole marketing franchise. They are doing something right. You don't have to have an original idea, but you can Legofy an original idea
Lego House
and
is
still
a
make it
powerhouse
your
of
own.
gaming.
I always hear very two-side opinion about Lego games. I either hear it's being very good or very bad.
The Lego Indiana Jones and the Lego Star Wars games, fun, just fun. Like there is no hiccup. They are just very fun games. I really can't. I could talk them up to a point. They're not the best games in the world, but they're fun. They're just fun. They're fun video games.
I do have one or two qualifiers about this.
Did I say fun enough yet?
You did. Very fun. They are fun games. Lego Star Wars, the original series, like the 1, 2, and 3 one that came out first, is like peak Lego for me. Peak Lego game. Then the original trilogy came out, the second one, and it was also just a blockbuster, smash hit. I loved it. Then Lego switched up their game design, or more like the world creation aspect of it. And so instead of all the Lego people just not talking, going, and just sort of mumbling and being animated, we started ripping lines from the movies. We started getting actual voice acting. Well, not voice acting. It was just, movie lines pulled from the movies. And I really noticed this for the Lego Lord of the Rings games. And they just weren't as good. I just wasn't as happy with them. And then...
I agree with you there, because the Lego Lord of the Rings is such a serious high fantasy where you can't do that same type of seriousness necessarily with Star Wars. Not that I feel it's a different directed audience than the Lord of the Rings original audience was. There's just not the same level of actors taking it that seriously.
I think that's actually a very typical example on more is not equal to better.
Yes, agreed.
I mean, I think we're talking about this and not moving on to the other thing, but
yeah, we're talking about what's important.
We're talking about the real issues for real gamers.
Yes.
Jesus.
Keep bringing in all sides this episode, everybody. All sides.
I need to come back to the Lego Star Wars and Lego franchise games, because I fell off the map after the third one. The compendium that came out before the new trilogy.
Yeah.
Which was, again, amazing. I played it on the Wii, and it was just one of the best games of all time.
That's where I used
on one of the best
platform
systems
I used to play it on too. I mean, I used to play Lego games on Wii.
Oh yeah.
That was the console to play.
That was that was the gaming console.
That was the only true gamers played on the Wii.
Yeah.
Oh, I miss those days.
Yeah, but no, I need to go back and see what's changed and what's the same, and whether it's still got the same charm that I remember from, I don't know, 2007. Jeez, it's been a while. Yeah.
Oh my God.
About that long. 13 years.
Time flies.
Yep. Yeah.
Can't believe
Tell me
it.
about it.
But no, those were good days.
Yes. But once again, I want to thank, and also I don't think that we would have any of these. I don't know. There was never any online Lego experiences, but anyway, like we see that Lucasfilm is teaming up with Bethesda now for this new Indiana Jones game. And we heard a little bit about the technical side of what Lucasfilm and Lucasfilm Games originally did from Chip and Matt earlier about the super technical side of what they were doing. We also got to say, next week, you'll be looking forward to an interview with Randy Farmer, who is one of the original people that worked with Lucasfilm Games and one of the co-creators of the game Habitat, which is one of our favorite exhibits that we have at the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment here.
Yeah.
You can also check it out yourself, and we'll give you that link coming that next episode. But oh man, he is an insight into some great stuff.
It's probably not about games, but one thing that is mentionable about him is he's one of the co-designer of Yahoo 362. So
yeah,
he has quite a track record.
Yeah.
Yes,
Randy's
still
a very interesting
involved.
guy.
Yeah.
Yes, and still involved in the series very much. So we will. Maybe we'll settle this video game movie talk next week as well as a longer part of our ongoing trilogy of Lucasfilm and adventure games. But we will be continuing talking about the history of adventure games for all of y'all out there. Thank y'all for listening. Basically, I have one little tidbit of what we've been playing. I haven't been, but with the world going the way it is, I've just been playing more Cyberpunk, but not to get too deep because we will get into that. It is set in an area that is close to my hometown on the Central Coast, and one of my favorite little tidbits that they have is the old butt rock station that I used to listen to as a child, New Rock 107.3 on the Central Coast. It's no longer a radio station, unfortunately. It is memorialized as Moro Rock 107.3 in Cyberpunk 2077. That is a childhood connection that I never thought I would see in a AAA game. Somebody from the Central Coast worked on this game and put that in there, and thank you, whoever you are.
That is a really nice little Easter egg.
It is so obscure. There's tons of movies and games about California, but for like my small town butt rock radio station that has been off the air for years to be immortalized, I mean, in a less than perfect launch, I say, is also pretty fitting.
Maybe it's one of your neighbors who did it.
Probably. I bet. Joe.
Somebody
I bet it was
knows.
you 90-year-old sailor. I bet it was him. But anyways, I think it's about time for us to wrap it up for all y'all, and then we will continue to talk to you every week, and we will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment's official podcast. If you have any thoughts, questions, corrections, or general museum ideas, please shoot us an email at info@themade.org.
We'd like to send a big thank you to all of our Patreon donors and everyone who donated recently. They keep the Made afloat. Patreon donors get to listen to this podcast 1 week before it's released on major streaming services, and we will continue that with future episodes every week. Until next time, I'm Miles.
I'm Chun.
And I'm Red. Thank you. Play what you love and love what you play.
See you next time.
See you next time.
See ya.